Starting our bulletin, in a dramatic escalation of the US-Russia tensions, Washington has announced a range of new sanctions against Russia in response to alleged interference in the 2020 US election, cyber hacking and bullying Ukraine, among other things. The Russian cyber attacks had allegedly targeted the 2020 US elections in actions which could be termed anti-Biden. After announcing sanctions against Russia, US President Joe Biden has said that now is the time to de-escalate for both the countries. Biden added that it was important for him and Putin to meet in person so that the two countries could launch a strategic stability dialogue on a variety of global issues.
Now is the time to de-escalate. The way forward is through thoughtful dialogue and diplomatic process. The U.S. is prepared to continue constructively to move toward that process. My bottom line is this: where there's an interest in the United States to work with Russia, we should and we will. Where Russia seeks to violate the interests of the United States, we will respond.
The measures come at a tense time for US-Russia relations. The moves target 32 Russian entities and include the expulsion of at least 10 diplomats. The US accuses Russia of malicious cyber activity and interference in the 2020 presidential elections. The executive order also bars US financial institutions from purchasing ruble-denominated bonds from June. According to the White House, the measures detailed in an executive order signed by President Joe Biden are aimed at deterring Russia's harmful foreign activities. Following the United States, UK has also summoned Russian ambassador over malign activity. Poland has also expelled 3 Russian diplomats for hostile actions. The European Union has voiced support for the United States. Reacting to the new sanctions, Russian Foreign Ministry has said that a response to the new US sanction is inevitable. The ministry has also summoned the US ambassador to Moscow, John Sullivan, and calling the move nonsense. Russia's Foreign Intelligence Service dismissed US claims that it was involved in cyber attacks on US infrastructure.
The response to the sanctions will be unavoidable. Washington must realize that they have to pay for the deterioration of bilateral relations. The United States of America are fully responsible for what is happening. I would also like to say that Russian Foreign Ministry has summoned the US ambassador. We will share with you additional information on the outcome of this conversation, which will be uneasy for the US side.
And WION correspondent Julia Chapman is joining us live from Moscow for more on this story. Thank you so much for joining us. Now, President Joe Biden has said that it is important for him and Putin to meet in person. Do you see this materializing? And if it does, what can we expect from a formal in-person meet between the two leaders?
It's unlikely to happen anytime soon because although when this meeting was first proposed on Tuesday in a phone call between Presidents Vladimir Putin and Joe Biden, it was welcomed by many Russian officials here in Moscow. Indeed, shortly after that phone call, President Putin then called his Finnish counterpart. Of course, Helsinki was the site of the last Russia-US summit between Presidents Putin and former President Donald Trump in 2018. So it did look like Russia was preparing the groundwork for such a meeting, and the call for dialogue between the two leaders was definitely welcomed. However, yesterday, in anticipation of the publication of these new sanctions, the Kremlin suggested that any prospect for such a meeting looked more distant now. They weren't ruling it out completely, but they said it wasn't going to happen anytime soon. Nevertheless, the White House very keen to keep dialogue open with Russia, not least as there continues to be a military buildup along Russia's border with Ukraine, something the US and many other Western partners are very concerned about. The Joe Biden administration seems keen to maintain that dialogue, keep the door open for discussions going forward with the Russian president. And of course, we did hear that the US ambassador, John Sullivan, was summoned to the foreign ministry for talks yesterday. That's not the way that it's been depicted by the US embassy, I should point out. They say that it was actually a meeting proposed by the US side in order to explain to the Russians why these measures have been taken.
All right. And also, as we mentioned earlier, following the United States, UK has now also summoned Russian ambassador over a malign activity. Poland has expelled 3 Russian diplomats for hostile actions, and the European Union, as we mentioned, has voiced support for the United States. What does this mean for the tense relations between the two countries?
It certainly doesn't help them. Of course, we are seeing quite a coordinated response from the West in support of the US measures and in support of its findings that Russia has been involved in all kinds of wrongdoing, from election meddling to hacking, and also the annexation of Crimea in 2014. Some of these sanctions are related to that as well. And so we've seen the EU, the UK and Canada also backing and taking part in some of these sanctions against Russian officials. That's going to cause a lot of tension with Russia at a time when there is a lot of tension already over the Ukraine situation. Efforts to try to de-escalate that situation are now ongoing. But certainly Russia very defensive about this. It has called these sanctions hostile steps, aggressive conduct, and the Foreign Ministry has vowed a decisive response. It says that it sees that Joe Biden says he wants to normalize relations, but such actions suggest that he doesn't actually at all. So it doesn't really raise a prospect for any kind of a thaw between Russia and the West anytime soon. But the Biden administration says that there is still room for dialogue and that it could have gone further in these sanctions. For example, it could have expelled more diplomats. It could have taken more sanctions against the Nord Stream 2 pipeline. But it wants to leave some room for dialogue with Russia going forward.
All right. And also now Russian Foreign Ministry, of course, has said that a response to the new US sanctions is inevitable. And I'm quoting here, what can we expect going forward?
Well, Russia likes to issue what it calls tit-for-tat measures when sanctions are implemented against it. So we're very likely to see the expulsion of some American diplomats, probably around the same number as the US has expelled from the Russian embassy and consulates in the United States. There could be some counter-sanctions, some import bans on American products as well. But that's likely to be the extent of it. Russia, of course, takes these measures again because it sees US sanctions as being aggressive. Russia maintains that it's done nothing wrong. It denies accusations of election meddling, hacking, etc. It believes the annexation of Crimea was a perfectly legal move. So it sees these as aggressive actions which it needs to defend itself against.
All right, Julia, thank you so much for joining us with all those details.